I love talking to my tribe because thanks to those people, those amazing people, I can see a world from a totally different perspective. And this happened once again during my conversation with Oscar. I felt like I was talking to a very, very good old friend. I hope you will enjoy listening to that conversation. Hello, good morning, guten Morgen, buenos dias. I'm not sure what is your language, but welcome back. Welcome back to my tribe. So, as always, I'm having an amazing guest. So, I'm not going to convince you that this is what's going to happen. You will see. You will see for sure if you don't know Oscar yet. And today, Oscar is bringing the topic. I know very little about the topic. So definitely, I'm going to learn a lot of things. Not sure how many of those things will be applicable for me immediately, but who knows? Who knows? We'll see what will be the learning journey. So, without any further long introductions, Oscar, thank you very much for joining me. And would you be so kind to tell us some amazing things about you, what we should know about you?
Of course, and thank you very much for having me. It's my absolute pleasure to be here. So I'm Oscar, if you want to pronounce it the Swedish way. Oscar Styf is my full name. I'm Swedish originally, but I've been living in the UK for so long at this point that I'm better at English than I am at Swedish. So I think we'll stick to Swedish for everyone's sanity and safety. Who am I? I'm primarily a massive nerd. I am a nerd about nerdery. I love nothing more than seeing people being passionate about stuff. Which is why I thoroughly enjoy working with leadership and working with engineers and developers, because they tend to be very passionate about what they do and very good at it. As for me, I am what you'd probably call a non-technical practitioner in the kind of space that we're in with Agile, etc., where I wasn't a developer. I was a project manager to begin with, and then I fell into this Agile stuff, much like many people do, by a reorg, and they said, "You're going to be Agile." Then everyone said, "Cool, what does that mean?" And for me, they said, "You pick either product owner or Scrum Master." That's what that means. And I picked Scrum Master. And that's how my journey began. And I've loved it ever since. I've been working with this for over a decade. But I started with project management, with Lean, Six Sigma, and the classic fun stuff, and process optimization and automation. And then I fell into this, and I thoroughly enjoy it. The main thing I like to do is look at how can I help people and organizations work better together, and remembering to focus on value. Ultimately, the reason we do this is to deliver more value. And whilst it's good to have a good time, if we don't deliver any value, we're not going to have a place to have a good time in. So we've got to remember that little detail in all the work we do as well. And that's me, I think. On that, I live very happily with my wife and my two dogs in Crawley in the UK, right by Gatwick Airport. If anyone doesn't know the geography of the UK very well. And I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your introduction. How do we say good morning in Swedish?
God morgon.
Okay. I could understand that, connected somehow, but I'm not sure if I know how to repeat that. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It's very similar to some other Germanic languages, like Guten Morgen, etc. in German, which is it's good, which is good, and then Morgen, which is morning. But then because it's local, you tend to miss some, syllables, etc., and it becomes almost a one word of Gumorgon.
Nice. So maybe today we will not speak in Swedish.
That'll be easier for me too.
I'm not unfortunately into that language yet, but who knows what the future brings. Oscar, you are bringing today a topic. You proposed the topic. Let's start with that. So what we are going to talk about today?
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons. So when I said that I'm a nerd, I really do mean it. Dungeons and Dragons is one of my few surviving hobbies. As someone who has ADHD, hobbies come and go very quickly. But Dungeons and Dragons has stayed with me for probably over 20 years at this point. I've been interested in playing it and involved in it and reading about it. It's managed to stay around.
Wow, that's impressive. That's impressive. So we know it's your hobby. And why did you decide to pick that topic? What's interesting? for us in it.
Yes, what's interesting for us and for the community and your viewers. So, Dungeons and Dragons is a game. Fundamentally, it's a game, but it's the kind of game that makes it interesting and powerful and useful, dare I say, for almost anyone to at least try at some point and kind of flex their muscles within a little bit. It's not going to be everyone's bag because it is fundamentally around improvisation and collaboration. It is a collaborative storytelling game where there's no single winner in the game. It's very much a game where if we're all having a good time, then we win. But if anyone is not having a good time, then we're not winning, and we need to fundamentally address that. Have those conversations as a group to see 1 out of the 5 people is not having a good time. How do we address that? How can we fix that? And then we work together. Now, those are all skills that are very applicable to all the work we do. How do we communicate? How do we collaborate? How do we improvise? Especially as facilitators and coaches and people that have to work in these weird, ambiguous spaces. Learning to kind of roll with the punches and reading social cues and improvisational cues and, trying to understand, is this a funny situation, a serious situation? Can I turn it from a serious situation to a funny situation or vice versa? These are all skills you learn through this kind of collaborative storytelling. Some people don't like the role-playing and kind of improvisational aspect of it, and that's absolutely fine. For me, I very much enjoy that. Some people enjoy what we call the math rocks portion of it, which is rolling lots of dice and seeing what the math pans out to say, because that's the randomization element that makes it more of a game as well, where you will try and roleplay and achieve something as your character, then you roll some die to see if the universe agrees with you, and if you roll well, it does. If you do not roll well, it doesn't, and then you have to adapt to that change in random chance, which is again a great way for us to learn about adapting to change. Because actually, the random aspect of the dice rolls is something you have to be able to respond to.
Yeah. That sounds amazing. You have thousands of connections in my head right now. And you said that maybe somebody does not like improvisation, this kind of games. But isn't it so that actually life, in particular professional life, can be seen exactly like this game? We may be not fans of improvisation, but we have to. We don't know what will happen. And maybe we don't like using this tools like dice to bring some probabilities, but isn't it our daily meal that actually that's life, right? No matter even philosophical and religious level, no matter what do you believe in, I feel like some aspects like unpredictabilities, like some ambiguities, risks management, it actually can be modeled using such a game.
Absolutely. And I do think most people, as long as they're introduced to it in the right way, in a way they're comfortable with and at their own pace, they will usually have at least a little bit of good time with it. Some people don't enjoy the kind of the fantasy aspect of it or the more make-believe aspect. They don't feel like there's enough, stakes attached for them to really care and be invested in it. Because, of course, improvisation and role-playing takes energy. Right? And some people don't understand why, but I want to spend my energy on that when I could spend it on something else. And that's understandable. But absolutely. And I'm sure you're familiar with the concept of masking in different scenarios. We put on a certain mask when we go to work, or we're with a certain group of friends, and with a certain family. And it's only really in our own home space where we can kind of completely take off the mask and really be ourselves. And if we're very lucky, we find 1 or 2 people in the world that we can have no mask around as well. But usually we always carry some amount of masking with us, which is effectively improvisation and role-playing that we're doing. It's just, it's in a more serious scenario, so we don't think about it that way. We think of it as, oh, but I'm just my work persona. I'm doing this thing. But what you're really doing is you're playing a character, right? You're playing your work character. You can just apply the same principles to either playing a game, like Dungeons and Dragons, or vice versa, if you're perhaps not very good at masking yet. Because it is a skill to mask, which is something that, for example, with people with neurodivergence or mental illness, they have to get very good at, because it's usually not acceptable, or it's getting more accepted, but still not fully accepted in society to have these things. So you learn to pretend you don't have them and act the way you're supposed to act and so on. And women are experts, as I'm sure you know much better than me. Women are barely allowed to do anything in society without scrutiny, so you learn very well to mask and adapt and change and act the way you're supposed to act and not really the way you want to act. And some people are not that good at it, so Dungeons and Dragons can be a very good way to practice in a safer environment with no real consequences other than in a game setting where we're all friends and trying to have a good time anyway. And then you can actually apply and, I guess using fancy language, you can accept those practices, you can readapt those practices from Dungeons and Dragons into real life. And better, role play, better improvise in those scenarios. One of the things I was bad at early on as a Scrum Master is I didn't have a very good poker face. So when people were doing things that I thought were kind of dumb, people could very easily see it on my face. And it was only when a developer said, hey, when we do these things, you look at us like we're the dumbest people in the world. And that was horrifying because there were times I did think that, but they shouldn't have known that. I should be a neutral facilitator, a neutral coach, so they can work within their own space and find their own solutions without my influence. And I had to work on my poker face. And that was something I had to learn to work on. And Dungeons and Dragons is one of those things where you can do that. Because sometimes in Dungeons and Dragons, you want to keep secret. Right? You don't want to show what you're feeling, even to the other players, because you're having fun in a scene.
I'm laughing because now I started trying to imagine your face, like you are a really stupid person, Joanna.
I've gotten better, but it was definitely a problem I had. I very much had that kind of resting bitch face. And I've worked on smiling a lot more and just trying to look a bit more jolly in general.
Do you remember one specific game or maybe a few specific games that were especially important, especially valuable, interesting for you?
Games are especially important, valuable, interesting. So there's one that comes to mind that really challenged me. So I tend to play the role of the dungeon master, as it's called, or the game master, where I run the game. So I make sure all the rules are followed or changed accordingly, and I kind of facilitate the gameplay for others. And there was one time, it was the first time my now wife played the game, and she was really struggling to think of a concept or even a name of a character to play. So she literally created kind of a blank character, which is normally a big faux pas because that makes life harder for everyone else. But we played it with the idea that she had memory loss. She literally didn't know her character. She didn't know herself who she was. And it was only as she started role-playing and acting things out, she started adding details, or I would provide certain details for her character that allowed her to flesh it out based on how she played it.
Mm-hmm.
So because she started playing more physically and being kind of I run into danger, she very quickly became a barbarian that wielded big, heavy weapons and could take lots of damage. And over time, that's what came out of it. And it was very much a lesson in getting comfortable with the ambiguity and seeing what evolves from that, because I was intensely uncomfortable throughout that. But what evolved was a very memorable character that literally eventually got the name of Nameless. So the character's name ended up being Nameless because they were nameless, and that's just what they started referring to themselves as, and other people referred to them as. And it was just a very interesting session. And then another time is when I got to be a player in my early days, so starting to actually role play in person, because I'd done a lot of it online. I had a wonderful DM, and it was not in Dungeons and Dragons, but it was in another tabletop RPG system. And I got to play a really strange character. I was this albino with a club foot, and I was from a noble family, and my character was just weird in general. And what I realized, when given free reins and living in my character, we were supposed to go on this big adventure, but I actually found more joy in planning how my character was going to build this fishing empire than how we were going to slay this big, evil bad guy that we were hunting. And I was still helping with that, but most of my internal thinking was, oh, well, that's fun. So if I buy this boat, maybe I can hire someone to do the fishing for me, and then we'll sell the fish, and then we'll buy some more boats, and I'll build a little empire. And over the next few years of playing, maybe I'll be able to fund our future adventures through my little imperium of fisheries. And it's one of those weird things that in almost any other game you can't do that, but in these kind of role-playing games, you can do pretty much anything, including starting a fishing business that can fuel future adventures. And it was just a weird experience and eye-opener of, yeah, you can do whatever. There are some rules, there's some structure, but you can work around it. not holding you back. It's enabling you to do things.
Sounds like a game of life.
Very much so. Very much so. I'm a big believer that what we do in real life, we're already agile. What we're trying to do at work is really just trying to do what we do outside of the workplace in the workplace. Because we already deal with complexity, we deal with chaos, we deal with all these other things. And it's just when we go to work, we become artificial. And we act in artificial means, which means we don't act naturally as we should do, as we know to do in certain scenarios. And in many ways, I just say what we're trying to do is we're trying to let adults be adults in the workplace.
You are making me more and more curious about the game. What do I need if I want to start?
What do you need if you want to start? Well, the good news is they have recently, in the last couple of years, they have made the basic rule set free. You can just download that online. You just Google Dungeons and Dragons Starter Kit or free material. And you'll find lots of it available. I would say you need at least 3 people. The ideal is 5 people. 1 person to be the game master, the dungeon master, and 2 to 4 players. Now, for newer teams, I would actually recommend smaller. So 2 to 3 players is plenty, and then 1 person running the game, so to speak. And then you need to spend a couple of minutes just reading through the rule set. It's not super heavy, the free rule set. The full rule set is a bit heavier, books and books of stuff, but you don't need to read all that stuff. You just need the basic structures. And then you need some people that are willing to try something new out and have some fun together. And they can either pick one of the many pre-made characters that are out there, or by creating characters, they will also learn the rule sets a little bit. So sit down and create those characters together. And then this is where, again, tying it back to the work we do, you want to run something called a session 0, which is basically you set up your working agreement. You set up what's our goal with this thing? What are the boundaries we're working within? What do we want out of this? What do we not want out of this? And you maybe also do a little bit of preparatory work, and maybe that's where you create your characters or talk about what your characters should be and how you then support each other. And, when we're talking about teams and teamwork and organizations, that's exactly what we should do before we start working as well, is why are we here? What are we wanting to get out of this? How are we going to work together? How are we going to collaborate? How will we support each other? And it's just doing that in a gaming session as well, because this is supposed to be a collaborative environment. So you need to set up an environment with rules around it on how do we collaborate. Even things like, hey, when we fight in the game, how will we deal with that conflict? Because you're role-playing, you're improvising, and we're people. So we're going to have real conflict around a game. So how do we deal with that? How do we de-escalate? How do we intervene, etc.?
If you remove game and Dungeons and Dragons, it still sounds like, hey, Joanna, I will give you some piece of advice at your work that can be used at your work, right? So, yeah, contract how to handle conflicts. Yeah,
absolutely. It's so applicable that it's crazy. And I think it's one of those classic things, right? It's just about how do you remove the packaging and look at what's within, and how can you then use those same ideas in other scenarios. And I'm sure it's something you do as well, which is the more I read, the more I learn, the more I study about all this stuff, the more I look for the commonalities, the trends, the patterns. I was inspired by that when I read about convergent evolution. I figured, well, there must be some similar ideas around convergent evolution in dealing with complexity and dealing with different kinds of problems and environments of what are the convergent practices that are appearing in different scenarios. What can we find in Lean and Toyota production systems? What can we find in Scrum? What can we find in Kanban? What can we find in even SAFe? What can we find in all these different places that seem to have the same ideas? Those are probably the ideas that are the good ones that we can use universally. And the rest is like good to haves, nice to haves, potential things that could work. And I think you can do that for anything, even if it's not work related. For D&D, having a session 0 at work, that's probably a good idea.
What if majority of my friends are remote connections? Can I still play the game?
100%. In fact, that's how most games are played these days. It is called a tabletop RPG because that's how it started, with the little miniatures and had maps on the table. But these days, it's almost always played online. In fact, that's how I'm playing all my games these days, is online, because I have some family and friends in Sweden. I've got family and friends across Europe and in the UK. And even within the UK, they're just too far away to be able to meet up frequently. So doing it online is easier. And there's lots of tools available, but Even if you have a Google Hangouts, a Zoom, a Teams, any way, the free option that most people use is Discord, some way to, at the very least, see each other's faces and ideally share a screen where you can scribble some stuff down. More than enough in terms of tooling. It doesn't have to be more fancy than that. And then you can maybe get extra fancy like me, where I have specialist tools and softwares that do certain things and simulate certain, tokens and pretend tabletops, etc. But that's entirely optional. That's just if you feel like that's something that brings you more joy.
Now I'm completely amazed, and I'm thinking if it can help us learn so many great things that are applicable in our professional settings, why I don't hear about this game from majority of the people around me?
This is a very good question. And Dungeons and Dragons has had a big surge over the last few years with, I think, especially over the pandemic, more people were watching online content and people found people that were playing Dungeons and Dragons on streaming platforms, etc., and on YouTube. And people got kind of interested in it because they saw these fun adventures playing out, because the reality is you can make any adventure you want. You want a space adventure, you can make a space adventure. You want a fantasy dungeon adventure, you can do that. A tale of kingdoms and politics a la Game of Thrones, you can do that. Any kind of adventure you want to play and any story as a storyteller you want to try and create with other people, you can do those things. And that's what makes it so universally enjoyed.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's still not mainstream enough where the average person you talk to on the street would necessarily know about it. They may have heard of Dungeons and Dragons or D&D, but they wouldn't be able to tell you what is it really. But I think that's it's never going to be fully mainstream because it's always going to have a little bit too much of a nerd stamp on it, which is a shame because it's a wonderful game. But I do think it's going to become more popular. And I've recently seen more discussions around the concept of wargaming becoming a bigger deal, shall we say, for governments and militaries and businesses around the world, where, that old school wargaming we imagine with people pushing ships and troops around the board, that's actually what Dungeons and Dragons evolved from.
Mm-hmm.
Evolved from that kind of wargaming idea into a more role-playing setting. But a lot of this wargaming and role-playing is actually becoming part of a lot of essentially strategies and, what would you call it, potential solution planning and crisis planning and crisis response, preparation. This is becoming more common in general. I've seen jobs posted on places like LinkedIn for war game specialists.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking maybe I need to do a career switch. But on a more serious note, it means that it is being picked up. It's being taken more seriously, even at a corporate level. Not Dungeons and Dragons, but the idea of these role-playing games, of these tabletop games and war games where you simulate scenarios, be they fantasy adventure scenarios or we're going to do a corporate takeover. What is that going to look like? Or there's going to be a new product launch. What's going to happen when that happens? How's that going to disrupt the market? How can we respond to that? You can simulate all these different things to see what happens. You can ask people to play a role. So you're going to play our competitor. You're going to play us. You're going to be a regulator. Let's see how we can make it happen. And you can design rules around it and play these games to get better at responding to uncertainties. Because as you say,
Mm-hmm.
this is everything we do, right? We improvise and adapt to what's happening around us, or we should be in a corporate setting as well, or in a business setting as well. And it's a very good way of getting comfortable with the ambiguity and uncertainty.
I love that conversation. I wasn't aware, I wasn't aware what you are going to tell me, and I'm in big awe, right? Oh, right. Definitely, I'm amazed. I'm definitely, stoked to hear that story. So seems like, I'm gonna Google. Maybe somebody would be willing to play with me. Who knows? Who knows? Even though, by the way, I don't perceive myself as a nerd or a geek. And now, maybe it will be slightly changing the topic. How do you define that? You use this word pretty often.
Nerd and geek. When I grew up, when I was a young boy, nerd, etc., geek, these were negatives. They were used in a disparaging way. As you're a nerd, that's something bad, right? To me, especially in recent years, is being taken back, shall we say, by the nerd community, by the nerds. Well, to me, what being a nerd means is you're passionate about something. A nerd is someone who is passionate. Usually it's being used disparagingly about things like games and comics and films, that you're a nerd about these things, you're a geek about these things. So to me, it comes down to you're passionate about a topic. And that's why I say I am a nerd about nerds. An engineer, they're a nerd about engineering, right? A senior leader, they're usually a nerd about business, right? A researcher, they're a nerd about whatever they're researching. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it, because research is grueling work, right? Anyone with a PhD, a guaranteed nerd about whatever they have a PhD in. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone through the pain and struggle, right?
Thank you.
So to me, nerd is almost synonymous with someone who's passionate about something. And it's just a shorter, funnier word I like to use because it evokes a bit of emotion in people when you say nerd.
I see. So I haven't built this connection yet in my brain. And although based on your definition, I'm like nerd in so many different things. Yes, PhD
Absolutely.
in
Everyone
robotics,
is.
crocheting, mushroom foraging, researcher, writer. That will be a little secret. When I was a teenager, I even won some competitions, some prizes, when it comes to writing. So looking at
Very
your
nice.
definition, I'm like nerd, but I still like, I'm not sure. Maybe I should.
It's one of those tags people find it, again, because we've grown up with nerd being, again, almost an offensive term, like a down-putting term. It's just a matter of, if you call yourself a nerd, okay, what are they going to tell you that's harmful now? If you yourself are calling yourself a nerd, there's nothing harmful about it. You're just owning it and saying, yeah, I'm a nerd about stuff. I'm passionate about these things. And if you ask me about it, I will gladly talk your ear off. But to me, nerd is a positive, and I'm a firm believer that everyone is a nerd about something. You have someone that's a football fan, they're actually a football nerd, right? Lots of sports nerds in the world. We just call them sports fan, we call them football fan, we call them something, but they're nerds. They're just nerds about sports.
Okay. So I will try to paraphrase. I will do some steps back. So Dungeons and Dragons isn't a game for nerds, any specific nerds. It's just a great way to create safe environment for experimentation and learning how to become more effective in professional but also personal situations.
Absolutely. Dungeons and Dragons is much like Scrum. It's a framework. A framework of rules and guidances and things you should go through to accomplish certain objectives. And if you don't like Dungeons and Dragons, there's many other systems and frameworks out there. Like Pathfinder is another one that's completely free. It's one of the things that's very different from Dungeons and Dragons. It's more rules heavy. It's got a lot of mathematics and rules in it. So if you really like crunchy, very in-depth rule sets for everything, Pathfinder's fantastic for that. Dungeons and Dragons, especially the newer versions, is more lightweight. It's tried to strip back rules to give more freedom for you to improvise within that. The way I play it, I remove even more rules. I'm very, very rules light. I'm happy to make stuff up on the spot as needed, because for me, it's less about following the rules and more about having a good time. There's tools like games like Lancer and Shadowrun, a million of them out there. And all of them are fantastic. It's just you got to find your flavor and then give it a go. See what you want to play. But I genuinely recommend that everyone should give it a go, because it is very powerful. And some people find it incredibly liberating. It is used even, I believe, and the internet will correct me if I'm wrong here, I'm pretty sure it's even used as a therapy tool. Because again, you get to put on a mask, you get to work through things. And some people use it to work through issues and problems they've had. Because you can go into very serious topics in Dungeons and Dragons as well. Like, trigger warning for those who are sensitive, but things like assault and rape and violence and, emotional issues as well. You can talk about these things and role play these things in an environment that is safe with friends that you trust. And whenever things become too much, you can take a step back. Warning, like with all of these things, a Dungeons and Dragons group is not they're not psychiatrists, right? They're not professionals. So that should not be your primary treatment method. But some people are using this as I can't afford proper treatment and I want to try and work through this myself. So I will myself choose to play a character that will interact and touch on these subjects to kind of almost exposure therapy myself through some of these things so that I can then take further steps in the future. It's a very powerful game. Just role playing in general is very, very powerful.
I'm definitely interested in playing. I
Give
don't
it
know.
a go. I have guest spots every now and then, so if you ever want to join one of my games, you just let me know.
Okay. So we have a deal. If I have an
Wonderful.
invitation, do I need anything to prepare myself?
I'll need to steal about 30 minutes to an hour of your time to create a character, and then we're good to rock and roll.
Wonderful. I'm excited. I'm already in. I'm in.
Fantastic. Love to hear it.
So having said that, that was strange. So in that episode, you challenge my approach to being nerd. I prefer to call myself a witch, but it also creates strange reactions. But definitely,
a witch is most certainly a nerd. Absolutely, which is they're a specific community of nerds, and I have great respect for them. Absolutely.
Maybe this is my community that I should connect to, but definitely I'm a witch. And I was super interested. I thought that you would show me something, but now I want to give it a try. So if that was your objective,
that is
wonderful job.
Merely a bonus.
Great job. So thank you very much, everyone, for watching us, for listening to us. Maybe we should all try to think about this passion, this nerdiness. And maybe Dungeons and Dragons is something that all of us, we should give it a try. So you know the expert, you know the Oscar. I will left some contact details, how you can find Oscar if you want to play with him, if you want to work with him, because it is also possible. And last but not least, I believe we have a very obvious candidate for this episode hashtag, which is Dungeons and Dragons. So if you want to share, if you want to comment, please use our episode's hashtag, and hope to see you in the future. Enjoy your day. Bye. And that's it.
We did it.